I'd like to introduce everyone to Kathleen Almy. I think most of you know Kathy. I'm going to do a bio of her right off the top of my head. Instructor at Rock Valley College. She is the founder of her consulting firm, AlmyEducation. She, of course, has done tremendous work in PMGE and also in Transitional Math here in the state of Illinois, and probably a whole bunch of other stuff that just isn't really at the tip of my tongue right now. So, ladies and gentlemen, here is Kathy Almy.
Hey y'all, it's so good seeing everybody. And gosh, Mike's video, oh my gosh, seeing Allerton. I miss that we can't all be, are getting together like we normally do. But in this session, I mean, definitely I have information to share with you, but we're gonna do a lot of talking together. So if there's things, because I mean, we were building in the last session, but I know there's things that are on people's minds. So this session is going to give you a chance to get some of that out and have a conversation about where we're going from here, because there's definitely some changes in post-COVID world, which we're headed towards. Okay, so let me get my screen. Can you see only my screen and not my notes? Good, yes, all right. Okay. So first off, one of the things that we're going to talk about is, well, not one, almost everything that we're going to talk about that is changing related to, it has a lot to do with COVID, obviously, because that has upset our world, but equity and equity reform are at the forefront of almost everything. So keep that in mind. That means the pandemic definitely got a lot of things going, but all the events that we had last year, especially with George Floyd, the whole conversation about equity has taken a whole new level. And that includes legislation in Illinois. So we're going to talk about that. I have a document for you. If you haven't seen the law and you're like, what law? We're going to talk about that some too. So I'm going to get so I can see the chat, because I'm going to start asking you guys some questions. But we're going to try to look at a variety of different things and see what's happening. And I don't have a crystal ball, but I do know this. I always knew this years ago when I was working on things, and the longer that I've worked in the reform space, I have learned that I am always ahead of the curve, which is a good thing. It's just that I'm usually ready for things before everybody else is, but I know usually what direction things are headed. Not always, I get it wrong sometimes too, but I have some ideas on what's happening, what's coming down the pike. All right, but before we do that, I want to hear from you. So what I would like you to do, don't hit enter. I want you to go to the chat, and I want you to type in something. What's a change that's happened since the pandemic that you think will last post-pandemic? And what I want you to do is wait. For those of you that know Maria Anderson, you'll know this technique. I'm going to count down 3, 2, 1, and when I say go, then I want you to hit enter. But right now, just type. What is a change that you think will last that has come because of the pandemic? Okay, and I really want you I want to hear from you, so type something. And I just read something today that says you're supposed to have a longer wait time when you are teaching virtually than in face-to-face. And I'm terrible at wait time as it is. So that's, I'm going to work on that. All right, 3, 2, 1, go. Hit enter. Oh, yes. All right, so, oh, this is fun. Okay, use the videos, virtual tutoring and office hours. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, lots of online, everything that's just going to be part of our world. Yeah, Roberta, that's a good, I mean, it does kind of feel like we're never off. I mean, even with email and all the things that, we already had, it felt like in some ways we were never off, but now it feels like we're never off work. So boundaries, that's going to be something we have to all work on. No more snow days. I know that kind of stinks. That was just kind of a fun thing to have always. Okay, pass grades can be used for prerequisites. Interesting. More online, reduction in placement. Yep, we're going to talk about that. Virtual office hours, online. Yes, working remotely. I like it. Oh, I'd love to hear that. Who is actually enjoying some of the things that have come from the, I mean, the pandemic obviously is a horrible thing, but is there anybody enjoying some of the things that have come from it? You can just say I am if you want to put in the chat. I'm just curious. So, yes, Chalice agreed. Yeah, I don't miss the commute, and I loved it the first 4 weeks. Yeah. Yeah, there's some pros to it. I mean, I think that one of the things that I miss, and I saw there's several RVC people that are on this. I miss the conversations in the halls. I'm just an adjunct at RVC now. I'm not a full timer, but even when I adjunct, I try to talk to people while I'm there, and that I miss the little, just the in between stuff. That's really hard to come about. Don't say just an adjunct. All right, Dave, I am an adjunct. I will not say just. I like that. Okay, Craig is working out right now. Wow, you multitasker, you. Okay, so that is impressive. All right, so let's go a little bit more controversial. What are you worried is going to last and why? And this, just go ahead and type and hit enter once you have it. Oh, Diane, I was wondering if you were still teaching. That's awesome. Okay, cool. And you can just hit enter whenever, but what changes are you worried are going to stay around and why? Okay. Ooh, too many ways to teach in one class. Yeah. Oh, interesting, Lori, unilateral administrative decision making. That one's not one I've heard as much, but yeah, there's been some of that. Absolutely, that's absolutely happened. That I won't ever see inside of a classroom again. Don, I do miss that too, and I do think that we will go back in some capacity. Some people are already back. I do miss that. Students winning extensions, yeah. 24/7 expectations. Yeah. No placement testing. Oh, yeah, true. Pass grades, no Ds. Oh, integrity. That's a good point. Yeah, I mean, that's a concern I think a lot of us have, especially in STEM areas. Yeah, the 24/7 availability. I think that's one of the key things that we probably all need to do. And I'm not teaching this semester, but when I teach next, that's one of the things I'm going to definitely try to point out more clearly in my syllabus, that it's like, I'm absolutely available, but like I sleep too. Like I'm not available like all around the clock. And, we need to have boundaries, just like students need to have boundaries. All right, Roberta Whiten. Okay, so these are interesting. All right, so what I'm going to do is go through some different predictions that I have and some, information about them. And the last one is the one I think you will be most interested in, and it has to do with Dev Ed reform and specifically the law. So we are going to get there. Don't worry, we're going to talk about that. Okay, so this is kind of, Captain Obvious, but I predict that online learning is going to return to pre-pandemic levels. I mean, this is just our new normal now. It's not going to be one of those things like at my college, we had online, but it was usually one section, maybe two, but even then it was usually one section of popular classes, but we didn't ever do with every class. And now it's, the horse is out of the barn. Like everything can be online now, and we could all be asked to teach anything online, or asynchronous, remote, synchronous, remote, that all of that it's happened. It's a possibility. So it's now we have a precedent, and I do not think that that's going to go away. So what's going to change though is the percentage of these. And, right now, obviously, because we can't, a lot of us be on campus right now, you might have completely 100% remote, 100% asynchronous, whatever. That's going to obviously change as we get more people vaccinated, and as the virus continues to get more under control. Fingers crossed that will continue to happen. But so the percentage of how much of that is in your schedule, in your class schedule for your college, how much is asynchronous or synchronous or remote or whatever, that's going to flex and fluctuate over time. But I think that is just part of it. And I thought it was interesting. Roger Hergert, I saw he was on here when he was sending me the the RVC class schedule for adjuncts for fall, I thought it was interesting how everything is denoted differently, and how you can see things that are like face-to-face or asynchronous, online, all of that. So in the coding, so it's, you know, it's just something that is going to be prevalent. That's just going to be part of where we're at. Doesn't mean that we're not going to have face-to-face, and it doesn't mean there's sometimes that face-to-face isn't better. But here's one thing that I think is kind of cool. Now, this is in theory, okay? In theory, if I am, like, I'm home with a kid that is sick, which isn't as much because my youngest is 17, but if I'm at home with a family member that's ill, or say that I'm at a conference and I actually had time during the class, I could teach it remotely in theory instead of having to miss it, even though it's a face-to-face class. There's some benefit to that. The thing is in actuality, is that going to be possible? If you're gone for some reason, there may be a reason that you're not there in the classroom, and you may just not be able to teach the class. But, you know, there's some possible pros for this as well. Okay, the next one. This started whenever we moved to online. We had this constant question of, what should we be teaching, and what should we be testing on, and what, you know, how are we supposed to be testing? We just started talking much more about our subjects, and definitely because we know students can cheat so easily with going to Google or Photo Math, or I just learned some other new way this week. I was talking to some high school teachers, and there's even more new ways that they can cheat. So the whole idea of, you know, having this proctored environment that we're used to with tests has been shaken up, and we're testing differently, and some people aren't testing, they're just doing assessment differently. But I do think the pro of it is that we are talking about the things that a lot of us, definitely me, these are the things I want to talk about. And I think there's a lot of you that are probably in the same boat, that there are absolutely things that we teach that are antiquated. And not that they don't have any value. It's not saying that. It's that there's other things that have value that we don't have in our curriculum, and sometimes we need to. And this is the time now we get to talk about it, you know, because it's on people's minds. This is a good thing. We need to adapt, and we need to modernize our curriculum. I mean, even engineering curriculum, because that's always the one. It's like, well, we can't change calculus because of what students have to know to go into engineering. Many of you know, I'm married to an engineer, 24 years this year, and my daughter's going into engineering. I've been around engineers my entire adult life, and the way that we teach math in and even our engineering classes is not reflective of how engineering actually looks in real life. It's heavy on technology, and it's heavy on collaboration, and they don't do tons of things by hand. It's not that by hand isn't important, it's just not the only thing. And so that idea of being flexible problem solvers, that's what engineers are expected to be able to do every day. And we aren't always encouraging that with the methods that we use in our classes for our STEM-bound students. So to me, this is an opportunity. If you've got administrations coming to you and saying, you know, we need to look at some of these classes. Do they still make sense the way they did before? Take that as an opportunity to get to the table. You're going to hear me say that multiple times. Get to the table and be a part of that conversation. And be willing to consider, because I've had to do this many times in my career. Is that topic as essential as I once thought it was? Maybe that's changed. We might change our mind about things that we couldn't imagine changing our mind about even 5 years ago. So being willing to have those conversations, I think, is incredibly important. All right, here's the biggie. And I knew we already had some people that mentioned this concern: placement. Placement. We are never going to go back to. I shouldn't say never, but it's highly unlikely. And I'm very confident for all you stats folks. We're probably not going to go back to the way that we did placement ever again. First off, we were already moving towards multiple measures placement, and I get that how people define multiple varies. There's multiple ors, there's multiple ands, there's ands and ors, there's all different ways you can do it. But the idea is, when people are saying multiple measures, what they're in, especially in like the research and everything, what they're meaning is it's not just an AccuPlacer or an ACT score. We've used those forever. So in some theory, we can say, hey, we've always used multiple measures because we'll take either one. No, what we're talking about is we're looking at other things. Specifically, we're willing to look at GPA, and sometimes specific GPA that's in, say, in math, but sometimes it's overall GPA, math coursework grading. These are the things that we are looking at because, and this directly ties into equity. Our testing structures serve certain students better than they serve others. And there are students that can absolutely be successful in our classes, but a placement test will not tell us that. And I think the main thing with this, because I know how I've been on placement for years and years and years. I was like, if AccuPlacer said it, it is gold. It is the gospel. And I have since learned that is not the case by a long shot. There are things that AccuPlacer tells us that's helpful. It is flawed, like every placement method is. And that we just have to be more willing to look at different aspects, even if you're thinking, no, that possibly can't tell us how students are going to do. We have to try things. And a lot of times we see the data bears this out, even though we don't think. Like the most classic example I can give you is when I talked to Randy Gallagher years ago at Lewis and Clark College, when they were one of the first schools, Harper, Joliet, I can't remember what other community college, there was a cohort of them that all were doing massive work with co-requisites. And Randy said to me, he's like, Kathy, we're actually going to put students that are placing into beginning algebra into a stats class. And I'm like, don't you mean intermediate algebra? And he's like, no, beginning algebra. And I teach stats and I have for 20 years. So I just can't wrap my brain around that. And I just could not imagine that the students could pass. And guess what? They did. Because a lot of our assumptions are flawed, unfortunately. Our assumptions that you have to have these specific courses or these specific skills or have seen certain things aren't always true. And so, I mean, that's where the pressure's coming from, where you're seeing legislation all throughout the country. Definitely Illinois is not unique to this. Is that these assumptions that we had about what a student must see before they can take certain college level classes and do well in them isn't always what we thought it was. And I've absolutely been in that group. And I really the data is what changed my mind. And honestly, data from people, and I know because not everybody believes all the data that they read. When I see a fellow colleague of mine in Illinois and I see the data from their school, so like Lewis and Clark, I believe that data. Okay, this is a colleague. So if you're in, I'll just throw that out there right now. If you're really getting worried about multiple measures placement, reach out to some of these schools like Lewis and Clark that have really gone all in with it and use ACT GPA the newer version of AccuPlacer. They use all of them and they really have done co-rec at scale. They can possibly give you some more confidence that it can happen, especially if you hear from a peer. So the big thing that we're moving away from is this idea of one high stakes placement test. And you might be thinking, oh, this is just developmental math. It is not. One benefit to being in the pandemic, my son is home 3 days a week until next week. He goes back 4 days a week starting next week. But the whole school year, he's only gone to school 2 days a week and the other 3 days he's at home. And he was involved in something in Rockford recently that had to do with the UIC School of Medicine, UIC Rockford, that they did like this health pathways experience. So as anybody that's interested in going in medicine, and Will wants to be a physician. So what it was like a 2 or 3 hour experience, and they got to talk to all different kinds of medical people, or students, professionals, doctors, PAs, nurses, all different kinds of levels of where they're at in medical fields. They got to ask them all kinds of interesting questions and hear them, and get their questions answered. And then they got to do a hands-on lab, which was kind of neat. They had this like fake skin and they got to do an IV. They got to learn how to do that. So that was kind of interesting. I had a blast. I just watched them. I was absolutely fascinated. But what was really neat was they talked about the MCAT. And they said that even the MCAT, we're talking, doctors here, that medical schools are moving away from that being the be all end all. And the doctors that were on the panel, they said there's a reason why we're moving away from that, because a single test score does not tell me about grit, about, perseverance and work ethic. And as much as I dearly love my son, who's in the other room, he scores phenomenal on placement tests, and he is lazy like you cannot believe when it comes to actual work. You can't see that in his placement scores. So that there's a reason that people are looking at other measures. Okay, so placement's going to continue to evolve. Yeah, Dave, I agree with you. Many times engineering students learn more in their engineering classes than in their math classes. Yes. Oh, Mike made a point. I've made over 500 lesson videos. You can still, I thought you said you're going to miss using them. Okay, I will be using those when I miss class. Yes, I was going to say all the work that you've done for the pandemic and anything that you've created, you can still use. Yes, that's awesome. And you could probably easily flip your classes now because you can have students watch certain things and then you can spend more time working problems with them. So 500, holy cow, that's awesome. I make new videos every day. Go Roberta. Oh my gosh, that's fantastic. All right, here's the biggie. Let's talk. Developmental math is going to continue to shrink, okay? So multiple measures placement is just one facet. Transitional math, which I know almost everybody on this call because you've all worked with me when I was leading transitional math for the state. Transitional math was just one aspect of Dev Ed. All of this is in the same realm of trying to have more students graduate college, and what often specifically holds them back is their math requirements. So we're not trying to reduce math requirements or dumb anything down or reduce rigor. What we're doing is changing where students start in the sequence, how long the sequence is, and who gets allowed to be in certain rooms that maybe in the past we wouldn't have allowed them to be because we thought that they didn't have the right qualifications. That is changing, okay? And it can work. But I work with colleges every single day on this. This is something I'm constantly doing in my work as a consultant. And it's just challenging work because you've got a lot of competing priorities, you've got competing assumptions, and then you've got, how administrators and how faculty look at things are not the same. And, there's reasons for that. So this is challenging work. But one of the things that I'm happy to see, and I know we have some, I know at least Diane, I don't know if there's anybody else that's on this that was on the task force for SJR 41, but IMACC was represented. There were a lot of people in that group that were on that, and the original Dev Ed bill that went forward that led to the task force for SJR 41 had much more prescriptive things in it. So that has really changed. It said this % of students must be in co-recs, or this % of students can't be in developmental education. And it was going to be very difficult to have any developmental education. And I do not think that that's necessarily, I don't think most of us would disagree. I think we need some Dev Ed. Now, do we need as much as we have? No, but because I have a friend in a school in another state where they scrapped their Dev Ed and now all their students are in first level classes, and they're like, so those classes are becoming like Dev Ed classes because we know the student is still the student because they haven't completely adjusted for the student. It doesn't have to be that way, but they haven't. Basically, their administration is like, we're scrapping that. We're just going to put them in higher classes without all the things it takes to make that work. Which are specific to say like co-requisites. There are ways to make those work. So what are some changes that are coming from this? You're going to see fewer developmental course options. You're going to see sequences that really shrink. The idea of having pre-beginning and intermediate algebra, that is going away. I read somewhere recently that it might have been in the law from Illinois. I can't remember. There was some statistic that 77% of colleges still use the traditional pre-beginning and intermediate algebra sequence. Even those that say, they have, they might have a co-requisite or they might have other options. They might have PMGE. 77% of them are still using our traditional pre-beginning and intermediate algebra. That is the thing specifically in Illinois that the legislators and the bureaucracies, the state, all of them, that's what they want to see changed. They do not want to see students going through these long sequences if they don't have to. They want to see them starting as high as possible and still be sound, and then potentially finish. Now, they're not all going to pass in a co-rec. No one claims that they are, but we are going to have more students that will finish, that won't, get just basically bogged down in intermediate algebra that they may really not even need if they're headed towards statistics. I've got my thoughts on that one, but how much intermediate algebra do you use in statistics? Oh, that's right, none. So, that there are going to be improvements and changes, but it is changing. So let's specifically, what is changing in Illinois? March 8th, I actually watched the signing of this. Legislation was signed, House Bill 2170, which was put forward by the Congressional Black Caucus in Illinois. And it is this sweeping legislation. It is huge. It is called the Education and Workforce Equity Act. Like I said, it was House Bill 2170. So if anybody wants to go, start reading that, but I'm going to have a document for you. Hang tight before you read the whole thing, unless you just really are interested, because it's enormous. But the main thing is it really addresses equity at every level of education, from preschool through higher ed. And here's a big one. It doesn't just affect community colleges. It also affects universities. That's huge. PWR Act did not really affect universities that much, very, very little. Okay, so, but the universities are affected by this new law as well. Part of it is called, the part that I'm going to share with you, Article 100, is what affects us as math teachers. And I think it's called the Developmental Education Reform Act, DERA, I think. I'm not 100% sure of that, but that's what I've heard. So I'm going to give you a link to a document that's just Article 100. So if you want, and what I would do, I highly encourage you to do this. I printed it off and I started highlighting so I could see what is it saying that who has to do when. That's what I wanted to know. What does the law say? So it would be to your benefit. Again, House Bill 2170, Article 100. I will be posting a doc in just a sec. I'm not posting it now because I know you're all going to go look at it. So that's why you're going to have to wait. What are the biggies that it says? Okay, it says that the colleges are supposed to, colleges and universities. So when I say colleges, I am including them. I'm just loosely saying that. It is the 4 years as well. It says that they have to use the multiple measure placement that came through. We had it come through IMACC. It went through several different committees, and it was eventually, it ended with the Illinois Community College President's Council. The way the law is written is it doesn't have any actual multiple measure specifics in the law because it's very difficult to change laws, and they know things are going to change. So the way they set this up is that it references this committee, this Council of Community College Presidents, and anything that comes to them has gone through the vice presidents, through the student service vice presidents, academics. It's gone through a whole host of people. IMACC sees things. A lot of people have seen it before the presidents see it. And right now we have a multiple measures placement documentation that's on ICCB's website. It's from 2018. That's the most recent one we have, that when they say multiple measures, that's what they're talking about. And that was what Mike was talking about in the first hour today. College algebra used to be listed as one of the classes that if students had a certain GPA, they could go straight into college algebra. College algebra is no longer on the list. Math for elementary teachers is, I'm not quite sure about that one because I was kind of think of that in the same category as college algebra. It has an intermediate algebra prereq, but you should definitely look at that multiple measures placement document. It's about 2-3 pages long. And the point is it can change and then this can evolve over time, but that's got to be put in. Now, in terms of when, I do not have in front of me the law right in front of me right now, so I cannot tell you when the date is, but they have deadlines throughout it of when colleges have to send reports, they have to send plans, because ICCB and IBHE are required to send reports to the legislature. So the General Assembly is going to be saying, what are you doing? One of the key things that when you're looking through this Article 100 is you will see they got really specific. It wasn't enough that we want to reduce equity gaps. They are asking colleges to give them the data specifically on Black students. How are they doing? Where are they at right now? And what are these changes? What's happening with them? They specifically say you have to make changes at scale, meaning it's not enough to say we have a section of something. You have to do it at scale. So this is big legislation. It's not nothing. I'll just put it that way. And it can be a good thing, but that's what I want to give you some tips on the work I'm doing on right now, and what I would highly encourage you to do, and tell you some of the things that are happening in the state related to this. Here's the biggie, and this was discussed a little bit in the last session with Melvin. It says that colleges are to maximize the probability that students will finish their math requirement in 2 semesters, which means you basically have 1 semester of dev ed. That's what you're down to. So the idea, again, pre-beginning and intermediate, not going to happen, okay? Because we can't finish now in 2 semesters. But do not freak out. I know that instantly it's like, what am I going to do with my lowest students? Okay, remember, first off, your lowest students are typically not headed towards STEM. They're typically headed towards technical areas or non-STEM. So even if you have to have a developmental class for them and then the outcome course is like a gen ed math, that can happen. They can pass those courses and it can be okay. There are other options that we can use. And this is one of the things that I work with schools. We go through and we look at what they have. I'm working with Shawnee right now. Roberta's on this call. Shawnee is one of several schools that I'm working with, and we go through and we look at their students, we look at the offerings they have, and we try to figure out how do we work within this law and work within ways that we still feel is sound as math educators. Okay, that's what's really important to me, that the faculty still have a voice in all of this. That's huge. Okay, so I get that. Do you think this will go back to, okay, emporiums, can you use emporiums? You can, but no, I think what's gonna happen is if you have students that are headed towards college algebra and they're not ready for a college algebra co-rec, which we know that there are many students that aren't, where you're gonna have to have a developmental class that will serve them. And I think that if they are ultra low and headed that direction, which again is not common, we may have to dip into adult basic ed options, intensive tutoring options, things like an emporium, but I do not think that that's going to be your norm. We already know that the data says that that is not the magic bullet that everybody thought it was 10 years ago. It's just a tool for certain students, but there are other ways that we can go about this. I'll tell you what it does. This makes me happy, and it's not because I wrote a textbook about it. So I'm just going to say that. I'm just going to put that out there right now. It makes me happy because I believe in the course. What we'll probably end up doing is what a lot of states who have already gone this route have gone to. I've heard about this for years. We can only have 1 dev ed class. Then their 1 dev ed class is usually PMGE or something like it. It's a course that is not just a pure beginning algebra class, and it incorporates some pre-algebra ideas, and then it helps lead into their STEM or non-STEM outcome courses better in a different way. So I'm not saying that y'all need to go do PMGE tomorrow. I'm saying that if you're wondering, does that mean that this is out and all the world is co-recs? That is not what that means. It does mean co-recs are big. I will tell you that. But the way that the law is written is whatever you're doing, you have to pick things that are backed by research. That's the way the language is given. So if you can find research that says pre-beginning and intermediate algebra are super effective, then maybe you could keep them. But it says in there you have to use research-supported methods. In PMGE does not necessarily track all students as non-STEM because you could have students. So what you could do is they could go into an intermediate algebra course, or with this, you could change it and they could go into some kind of intermediate college algebra combined course, and they could still, there are ways to make that work. But you can go from PMGE to a STEM route. At my old college, we had students that went straight into intermediate algebra if they needed to from PMGE, and they did fine. Actually, they did really well because most of them were nursing bound students. So there was a little lurking variable going on there. Okay, what else with this? Because I know this is what we need to, college algebra, co-rec is key. And actually, I don't know, is Donna Carlson on here?
I am on here.
Yay. Okay, because Donna, you're actually on my to-do list to reach out to you and Kimberly Polly. And I don't know if Kim's not on here, but I would love, and maybe you guys are going to be talking about this at IMACC next week, I don't know, but both of your colleges, so for everybody who may not be aware, so I'm talking College of Lake County and Harper College, both of them were trying in the last 2 years college algebra co-recs, but not the same way that Lewis and Clark does, where theirs is like a 7 credit hour college algebra co-rec. It's literally like a 4 credit intermediate plus a 3 credit college algebra. Whereas CLC and Harper were trying more integrated and embedded approaches with college algebra and intermediate. Donna, did you want to weigh in and share anything about that?
Sure. How about a plug to come to our session on next Friday at 3 o'clock? College of Lake County is going to be revealing our tremendous success we've had in reducing the number of students in DevEd using a very unique approach.
Oh, I will be there. It was already on my list, but everybody else, get thyself there, and we need to get and spread this around. I'm sure Mike is on here, but I definitely, if for any, I was going to say, if you're in a community college, hello, we all are, but come to that. Well, not all. We do have some that are at universities as well, but they're affected by this too. I would say anybody that's in IMACC should come to their session next week. I have no idea what's up against you, and I feel terrible if I'm saying that about someone's session that's up against them, but this is, if you deal with DevEd at your college, I think that, you know, come to theirs. We could get some really great ideas.
Well, we have reduced our DevEd sections from 49% of our math sections were developmental education. And this past fall, it was only 21% of our sections. And we are not doing a co-rec model in gen ed, just so you know. So if you're intrigued, come to our session next Friday at 3.
I'm super intrigued. I think I know what you might be doing, but I want to see it. I'm not gonna make my guess yet, but I'm so excited. That's so cool. And yes, and Mike said we're recording everything, so if you miss anything, you can see something else. So, do you think developmental geometry will disappear? Yes. Yep. I think whatever you have with, I mean, that's the one thing that's nice about PMGE, has geometric ideas in it, but you were also, you know, we don't worry about geometry if a student has had transitional math, and it all comes back to the high school requirements of that they can't graduate unless they've had 2 years of algebra plus geometry. We're reliant on that. I do know, yes, there's some 50-year-old that's coming back and maybe they didn't have that, but I think that any geometry we will have will be just in time at the point that we need it. I do not think we will have standalone courses. Which most colleges, the offerings for geometry have shrunk down almost nothing. So that's not going to be a huge change, but that's definitely one. Okay, so I want to put, here is, again, please don't go read it this second, but I want you to have it. Here's a Google Doc. Let me go to the chat. Okay, so this is the Article 100 that I was talking about. Oh, so that's what I wanted to tell you about. Okay, so there are different groups in Illinois that want to work with community colleges to help them make these changes happen. They recognize that this is not simple or quick, and and you're being told to do it. So that even makes it more fun. So I've been contracted by Women Employed, my group, AlmyEducation has. So, and some of you have received emails from me. We're reaching out to several community colleges in Illinois to see if they are interested in working with Women Employed. AlmyEducation would be providing the technical assistance. I mean, I'm the one that's sitting down with you and like, okay, guys, here's the requirements. How do you want to make this happen? I do not come in to you and say, it's all co-recs or nothing. I don't do that. I come in and I ask you, what do you want to do, knowing these are the constraints that we have? Okay, so if Women Employed reaches out to your school, you know, please consider it. The school gets $10,000 and they get a year and a half's worth of technical assistance. And we have like a convening this summer, a convening next summer, and then we have some site visits, virtual and or face-to-face. The idea is the 10 colleges that are doing this are, some of them are very far ahead, some of them are just beginning, a lot of them are in the middle. And we try to get to colleges that aren't always, you know, we know that there's some colleges that are always in this work. They're always ahead of the game. We were trying to get other colleges as well that sometimes aren't always a part of this kind of work because this affects everybody. So if you've got an email from me and you're wondering, hey, what was that about? And you're not sure, just email me back. But Women Employed is reaching out. There are other groups that are seeking funding right now as well that will be also offering schools funds to help them with their implementation. That just, I can't speak to how far along that is because they're just still in the application process with their funder, but that has happened. ICCB had grants in the fall. I mean, several colleges got them. It was one grant. It was the Developmental Innovation something with developmental and innovation was in it. But Shawnee, that's where they have grant funds. That's how they contracted me to come in and work. But there's several colleges that got funds from that. So there has been money around, and I'm definitely, keep your ears open for that. I would say if you're in this boat where this is going to directly impact you and you think you're going to be someone who's going to be working at this in your college, be proactive and go to your administration and say, how are we going to do this, so that you are ahead of the game, so you are not told how it's going to happen. That is my biggest suggestion. I mean, when you look at schools like, hey, thank you, Roberta. And when you look at schools like CLC, they have faculty that are super active, like Donna, that are they are in it all the time working on things. There's lots of colleges that are like that. Don't wait until administration says, hey, there's this law and we've got 6 months and this is what we're doing, like it or lump it. You don't want that, okay? Be proactive and try to get on top of this so that you can have, oh, thanks, Greg. So you can have some say in it. Okay, so I want to talk more about that, but I want to give you a couple of things that could potentially help you with your administrators, and they are free. So first off, I made a document recently for administrators. And if you go to, I've got it on the screen, but I also put it in the chat. If you go to this page, you can sign up for, it's this free document, and it's called, I think it's like 3 things you must do before you start a redesign. And just know this, my perspective is, even though I've been on the side of administration and I've done a lot of work with the state, I always am looking at things with a faculty lens. And so when I'm working with administrators, what I'm constantly trying to do is, how do we get the faculty on board? How do we include them and respect their perspective and their knowledge? Because that's what I would want. I would want someone to respect the fact that I've been doing this for over 20 years. Okay, so this document would be great. I would just say, download it, print it out, or send a PDF to your administrator and say, hey, this is someone who deals with redesign all the time. I've been doing redesign for almost 15 years at all different levels. And these are things that I have seen that make a difference and that matter. And here's the punchline, you guys will see it. A big thing is, how are you including your faculty? Don't just go for the top-down approach. They don't work. You've got to have your faculty on board. Also, next week, I am doing a free webinar. Some of you might know this if you're on my mailing list. So here's the link for this if you want to sign up, or just want to get the recording if you can't come to it live. I think it's on Wednesday at 2 of next week. But I'm doing a webinar about the things that you have to do to make your redesign successful. And it's definitely something that these are things that I want you to be able to use and go to administrator and say, see, these are things that we need to do. Faculty need to be involved in this, because they do. And any reports typically say that, but I really emphasize that because it matters. Your opinion on this matters. Okay, so where do we go from here? I know we're almost done. Those of you that work at Rock Valley, you might know Brian Shelton years ago, who was on negotiating. He told me this many, many moons ago. I said, how could you be on negotiating and be on contract review? Oh my God, that's so time consuming. He said, Kathy, you're either at the table or you're on it. And then of course, this is actually Al Capone evidently said this, who knows, somebody on the interwebs said it. The main thing is, years ago, I started doing this and it has not let me down. Do not sit in your office or somewhere and just kvetch about things. Get yourself to the table, be it virtual or physical, but get a part of the discussions that are happening at your school, because they are going to happen if they haven't started, and you want to be a part of it. And there's no use in saying, we don't have to do any of this. Yes, that's why there's a law. Yes, we do. But there's lots of flexibility in the law, believe it or not. There's a lot of different ways to go about this. And so this is where your expertise comes into play. And that's why you need to be there. It's not just as simple as, we're all going to do co-recs and go home. Boy, is it not that simple. I will tell you that right off the bat. It is not. But you can have a say and get things changing for the better. All right. So I'll put my contact information up here, but what other questions do we have or comments? Who wants to unmute and has just a comment on something? And I'm going to read. Let's see. Thoughts on the pressures this puts on our faculty and adjuncts regarding credentials to teach college credit. Yeah, that is one of the main things that I have to look at when I'm working with a school, because some schools have developmental only departments or developmental only faculty who may or may not have the same credentials as the faculty that teach credit level. So we have to figure out, how does that work? Because you're going to have a shift in where your students start. The reality is that even though students are shifting up, from Dev Ed, a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them are shifting up, they still need support. They're not going to just get through stats with an extra hour a week. It matters how that extra hour a week or 2 hours or whatever happens. So that is where developmental faculty who primarily teach developmental need to be a part of how this is going to look. And then there still will be courses, not as many, but there will still be some developmental standalone courses as well. Our chair, okay. Our admin is telling our chair that we wouldn't be able to over one Dev Ed and one, we wouldn't be able to go over one Dev Ed and one co-rec, that the co-recs were basically ruled out by the new legislation. Okay, co-recs are, do you mean that they're basically mandating the co-recs? Because that's what a lot of people are interpreting this as the new law. It's really the only way to make the requirement they want work. Not totally, and obviously Donna has an approach that it's not the only way. But the idea that we have to vastly minimize, we can only have 2 semesters, and one of those semesters needs to be the college level course, co-recs are definitely an approach to it. It's not the only one. There are other ways, but they're gonna be a big part of it. The thing I'm constantly pushing administrators is, like, let's not just think that's our magic bullet and that everyone is served by a co-rec, because they just aren't. But there are a lot that are, and that's the main thing. We couldn't require a student to take a co-rec after, it doesn't say that you can't require a student to take a co-rec after Dev Ed. That may have been an administrator interpreting that. You could. One of the things, like with transitional math, is we can't place you can't place the student into and require them to take the co-rec version of stats. They can go into like a regular version of stats if they have transitional math. Same thing here. You have flexibility. If you want them to go into a co-rec, you could do that. I don't know mandating if they do or don't. I mean, the law doesn't say you have to do anything in terms of that specific. So, I mean, that's the main thing to look at. That could be what your administrator wants. But what they are going to want is the least number of credit hours that a student can get through their math requirement and be sound. Now, that's the part you guys need to be emphasizing, and be sound, that we're not doing things that are going to harm students. But I think what you might be surprised with is what actually students can do. I know I was, that the things that they can do that I didn't think that they could. But it does happen. There are students that start at the beginning algebra level who can pass stats. Who knew? And there's been a random control trial study done by CUNY, City University of New York. They actually did a random controlled trial study where they took students that place at the beginning algebra level and they randomly put them in either they're going to take beginning algebra with support, or stats with support, and which one was the highest. The stats with support was the co-rec, and the stats co-rec had the highest pass rate out of all of them. And these students all started at the beginning algebra level. So just think that's interesting. All right, I know Mike probably needs me, because we're going to be headed towards curriculum committee, some of us at 4. Is there anything else you guys have questions on? Also, reach out to me if you're not sure. I mean, if you want to talk or something, or you need advice on something, or to vent. Sometimes I really just want to do that. So just reach out if you need more information. All right, Mike, it's back to you.
All right, thank you so much, Kathy. Much appreciated. Don't forget, yes, next week at 1 o'clock again, we have keynote at 1 and 3 o'clock. We have those breakouts, including Donna's and CLC's wonderful job that they're doing with college algebra. And our business meeting is at 2 p.m. And yes, if you're on curriculum committee, they're meeting at 4 p.m. here today. So don't forget that as well. Thank you, Kathy, so much. And the rest of you, thank you for attending today. Have a wonderful and safe weekend. And we hope to see you all back next Friday. Thank you all.
Everyone.